My name is Maya Carter. I am 33, and the day my mother canceled my plane ticket just to teach me a lesson was the day everything I believed about family shattered. I remember the cold Denver sunlight on my face, the airport noise fading, and my phone vibrating with her message, "Have fun walking home." Hours later, a sheriff stood on my parents' porch with papers that carried my signature, not theirs. But what they didn't know was that the ticket they canceled wasn't the only thing I owned. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Stories like yours remind people that they're not alone in carrying wounds they never asked for. If you've ever had to swallow hurt just to keep the peace, this next part will feel painfully familiar. I grew up in a house that always felt a little too loud in the wrong ways, and too quiet in the moments when I needed someone to actually hear me. The Carter house sat at the end of a cracked suburban street, the kind where porch lights buzzed with dying bulbs and neighbors pretended not to notice arguments through thin walls. Inside, everything revolved around one person, my older sister, Haley. Even the air seemed to shift for her. Some of my earliest memories are set in our cramped kitchen, the one with peeling yellow wallpaper and a leaky faucet that sang all night. Diane, my mother, would stand by the stove, flipping pancakes the way she liked them, burnt around the edges, raw in the middle, while Haley sat on the counter swinging her legs. The smell of overcooked batter mixed with the citrus cleaner she used on everything. She'd slide the biggest pancake onto Haley's plate without looking at me, then drop a smaller broken one in front of me like it was a favor. "Eat up," she'd say without turning around. Haley would grin at me, syrup dripping from her fork, a quiet kind of triumph in her eyes. I swallowed it. But the silence she served alongside breakfast always carved deeper than I knew. There was a night I must have been 8 when a thunderstorm hit and the power cut out. I remember the house humming with tension instead of electricity. Richard, my father, lit candles and placed them on the coffee table. The warm glow stretched long shadows over the walls. Haley immediately climbed onto his lap, tucking her head into his shoulder like she was the only child he'd ever had. I sat on the floor beside them, hugging my knees, close enough to feel their warmth, but far enough to be forgotten. At one point, lightning cracked so loudly it shook the windows. I flinched. Dad glanced down at me, then shifted slightly, adjusting Haley so she was more comfortable. I wasn't touched. I wasn't pulled in. I wasn't soothed. I didn't know it then, but moments like that would matter later. By middle school, the favoritism wasn't subtle anymore. When Haley made cheer, Captain Diane printed flyers and taped them around town like a political campaign. But the day I won a writing contest, first place, a small certificate, nothing dramatic, I walked out of the school gym clutching it proudly. Diane didn't even slow down. "That's nice, honey," she muttered, pulling Haley forward for photos in her uniform, while Richard tried to carry 2 bouquets at once. I stood there under the harsh fluorescent hallway lights, holding a piece of paper that suddenly felt like trash in my hands. I swallowed it again. But the shame tightened something in me I wouldn't notice until years later. At 15, the house became suffocating in a different way. Haley hated sharing a bathroom, hated when I touched her mirror, hated when my shampoo sat next to hers. One winter night, she stormed into the kitchen shouting something about how I stunk up her space. Diane didn't ask questions. She pointed at the door. "Go cool off outside." It was 24 degrees snow piled against the driveway, the wind sharp enough to sting my cheeks. I stood out there in socks and a thin hoodie, breath fogging in the porch light glow. Through the window, I saw them, Diane rubbing Haley's shoulders, Richard sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. After 20 minutes, my toes numb, I knocked. Diane opened the door, just enough to hand me a blanket. "Stop being dramatic," she whispered. "You make things harder than they are." I didn't know it then, but this was the moment I learned survival doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes it looks like silence. By 17, I'd been kicked out twice once for asking why Haley didn't have to do chores once, because she lied and said I stole her necklace. Richard didn't even look at me while I packed a black trash bag with jeans and t-shirts. I carried it to the curb and waited for a friend to pick me up, watching the porch light blink like a warning. I swallowed it then too. But something inside me cracked in a way I couldn't fix. Years later, I would see the same pattern every time I walked through that house, chairs saved for guests. Haley's photos everywhere, my face appearing only in old school pictures pushed behind a stack of mail. I didn't understand why they needed her to shine so brightly, but I understood why they needed me dim. That was the rhythm of my childhood: Haley laughing, Diane praising Richard, ignoring, and me learning to disappear. By the time I turned 18, disappearing had become second nature. I moved through the Carter house like a ghost, quiet, careful, always bracing for the next comment that would remind me exactly where I stood. When I finally left for college, it wasn't a celebration. Diane handed me a grocery bag with off-brand ramen and said, "Don't expect us to bail you out when things get hard." Richard added, "Your sister didn't need help. You shouldn't either." There was no hug, no good luck, just the screen doors slamming behind me as I dragged my duffel to the bus stop. College wasn't glamorous. My dorm smelled like instant mac and cheese and burnt plastic from the microwave no one knew how to use. I worked nights at a diner, wiping down sticky counters while the jukebox sputtered old country songs. The air always smelled like grease, cigarette smoke, and the cheap strawberry gum waitresses chewed to stay awake. I'd get off my shift at 2 a.m. fingers sore from gripping plates, ears ringing from clattering dishes. But for the first time, the exhaustion felt like mine, earned, not forced. Every few months, Diane would text, "Send money. The electric bill is due," or "Haley needs a little help, be a team player." I would wire whatever I could spare, convincing myself it was normal to be the child who gave while the others took. It wasn't until much later that I learned Haley used some of that money for concert tickets and designer shoes. Back then, I chalked it up to bad luck, another thing I swallowed. There was one Thanksgiving when I came home during my sophomore year. Snow drifted across the driveway, crunching under my boots as I walked up to the house. Through the window, warm yellow light spilled across the living room. Laughter echoed. For a moment, I let myself imagine they might be happy to see me, that maybe they missed me. But when I stepped inside, Diane barely glanced up from basting a turkey. "Oh, you made it," she said as if I were the neighbor's kid. Haley breezed past me, in a sparkly sweater perfume trailing behind her. "You can sit on the folding chair," she said, pointing to the corner. "The dining table is full." I looked. Haley had invited 2 friends, girls I barely knew, who sat comfortably in the seats that once belonged to my grandparents. I sat on the metal chair. It wobbled every time I shifted. During dinner, someone asked Haley about her job interview, and the whole table buzzed with excitement when I mentioned I'd been promoted at the diner. Haley smirked. "Congrats," she said. "Maybe next year you'll make real money." Diane didn't correct her. Richard didn't chuckle awkwardly. They just kept eating. The smell of turkey and cinnamon candles turned bitter in my nose. I swallowed it again. But that night, lying on the sagging living room couch, with a draft slipping under the windowsill, something inside me hardened a little. After college, I rented a tiny apartment near Denver and worked long hours at an insurance office that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. I was determined to build a life no one could take credit for or take from me. Slowly, painfully, I climbed. I got certified, became a financial advisor, saved every spare dollar. When I bought my condo, a small place overlooking the lake, it felt like stepping into a life I never thought I'd taste. Clean air, quiet nights, no one yelling my name from down the hall to fix their mess, no leaky faucets or broken porch lights, just peace. Aiden came along a few years later. His father left early in my pregnancy, claiming he wasn't built for responsibility. It shattered me for a while until I held Aiden for the first time. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, soft and warm, and I felt something I'd never felt in the Carter house chosen. Real love. Not the conditional type that snapped like old rubber bands whenever you made a mistake. I promised myself he would never feel like I did, forgotten, invisible. But the Carters had a way of clawing back into my life. Even after I built something stable, they treated me like the backup kid, the safety net, the person who should show up whenever they snapped their fingers. There was one Christmas where I brought Aiden over with a backpack full of toys. Diane greeted Haley's kids with squeals and hugs, but when Aiden stepped inside, she said, "Sweetie, don't touch anything. Go sit near the tree." He sat on the carpet while Haley's kids jumped on the couch with cookies. My jaw ached from clenching. I swallowed it. But for the first time, I felt something other than hurt. I felt anger. Not the burning kind, the quiet kind. The type that waits. I didn't know it then, but every moment I stayed silent was building towards something bigger. Every humiliation, every dismissal, every time they told me to stop being dramatic, all of it was becoming the backbone of a reckoning I never planned, but would eventually step into with both feet. Because the day my mother canceled my ticket was not the day things broke. It was the day things snapped into place. Trouble in my family never arrived all at once. It came in small cuts, shallow enough that outsiders might miss them, but deep enough that eventually they scarred over into something I could no longer ignore. After I bought my condo and settled into my work routine, I thought distance would dull their edges. Instead, it sharpened them. The shift began a year before the canceled ticket incident. I was in my office late one evening, the building humming with that hollow, quiet corporate spaces get after dark. The air smelled faintly like stale coffee, and the plastic from the printer overheating. My phone rang Diane's name, lighting up the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Where are you?" she demanded, before I could say hello. "At work," I said. "It's 7, Mom. Well, Haley needs you." "She's stuck at the salon and can't pick up the kids. Richard is golfing." "You're closer?" I wasn't closer, not even slightly. But logic never mattered in the Carter house. "I can't leave," I said. "I have a deadline tonight." Diane exhaled sharply into the phone. "You know this is why no one relies on you. You always make excuses." My throat tightened. "Mama, She hung up. I stared at my reflection in the dark window, the city lights blurring behind me. I swallowed it again, but the humiliation burned hotter this time. A week later, Haley called me while I was in the grocery store with Aiden. The cart was filled with cereal boxes and dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets he'd begged for. My phone buzzed nonstop until I finally answered. "Hey, can you Venmo me $200? Haley asked casually, like she was asking for sugar. "I'll pay you back next week." "You still haven't paid back the last $200, I said quietly. "Oh my God, Maya, relax, it's just money. You're better with finances, you'll be fine." Before I could respond, she added, "Also, I used your name for the PTA donation. Your job title looks more impressive. Don't freak out." My stomach dropped. "Haley, you can't just—" But she'd already ended the call. The weight of Aiden's small hand on my arm was the only thing grounding me. His eyes looked up confused, as if he could feel the storm gathering even then. I forced a smile for him. But inside, something twisted. That wasn't even the worst of it. One night, months later, I received an email notification from a bank I didn't recognize. It was addressed to me. My name, my social security number, everything correct, but the account had been opened years ago. I clicked through the documents, each line of credit purchases glowing on the screen like flashing warnings, Haley's shopping boutiques, salon charges, restaurant bills, all under my name. I called Diane immediately. "Mom," I said. Trying to keep my voice steady, someone opened a credit card with my information. Silence. Then Diane laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, honey," she said, "that was ages ago. We needed it for some bills." Haley handled all the paperwork. It was easier for her. Easier for her. My voice cracked. "This is identity fraud." Diane sighed. "Stop being dramatic. It's family." That night, long after Aiden fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the glowing screen. My condo felt colder than usual. The lake outside was still dark, mirroring the heaviness in my chest. That phrase, "it's family," echoed like a curse. The next escalation came on Christmas Eve. I brought Aiden to the Carter house wearing his little sweater with red stars' cheeks flushed from the cold. The living room buzzed with Christmas lights and the smell of Diane's cinnamon candles, too strong, always too strong. Haley's kids ran wild across the couch while Diane clapped and laughed. Aiden stepped in behind me, clutching a small wrapped gift he'd made at school. He held it with both hands, proud and nervous. The moment he approached the coffee table, Diane frowned. "Sweetie, don't touch anything. Go sit by the tree." Haley's kids didn't even look at him. They were too busy tearing open presents Diane had labeled with glittery tags. Aiden sat on the floor, placing his little gift carefully beside him. His eyes shined in the dim light, not with excitement, but confusion. "Mama," he whispered, tugging my sleeve. "Why can't I sit with them?" My throat locked. I couldn't speak. I just ran my hand through his hair and whispered, "You're okay, baby." During dinner, Haley bragged about some new influencer deal. Diane practically bowed. When I mentioned a new client I'd landed, Diane waved a hand dismissively. "Well, good," she said. "Maybe now you can help your sister more." The table laughed. Even Richard smirked. Aiden looked at them, then at me. He didn't laugh. And something in me split clean down the center. 3 days after Christmas, I picked him up from school. His backpack bounced against his small shoulders as he ran toward me. But he wasn't smiling. "Mom," he said, quietly. "Grandma told me I'm just visiting, that I'm not the same as the other kids." My heart dropped so violently I felt dizzy. The cold January air stung my eyes. I crouched down so we were eye level. "Who told you that?" I whispered. He hesitated. "Grandma," she said. "I'm not really part of the family." I hugged him so tightly his little body trembled against mine. For the first time, I didn't swallow it. I couldn't. But the escalation wasn't done with me. A few weeks later, I got a text from Evan Haley's husband. We barely spoke. But that night he messaged, "Sorry for everything. Your parents crossed a line this time. Haley too." I stared at my phone. "Why are you telling me this?" He replied, "Because they're planning something with the house. You should check the records." That message, 12 words, became the spark that would eventually burn everything down. I didn't know exactly what he meant, not yet. But soon I would. And when I did my silence, the thing they relied on most would be the first thing to die. I didn't sleep that night. Evan's text kept replaying in my head, looping like a broken radio. Something about the house, something that mattered enough for him. Haley's husband, a man who normally avoided conflict, to reach out to me in secret. The next morning, after dropping Aiden off at school, I drove to my office even though it was Saturday. The building was empty, the lobby echoing with each step I took. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, cold and sterile. When I sat down at my computer, my hands trembled just slightly. I typed the address of the Carter house into the county records database. And there it was. A mortgage application pending review. Not by Diane or Richard, but by Elmbrook Trust. My trust. They had tried to use the property. My property as collateral for a refinance they believed would land in their favor. They didn't even know Elmbrook belonged to me. They just wanted money, fast money. Money they did not earn and did not intend to repay. My breath caught. I leaned back in my chair, the old leather creaking beneath me, and stared at the screen. All the years of dismissals, insults, and manipulations were one thing. But this was something else entirely. This was calculated theft. Later that week, when I confronted Diane about the application, she answered the phone like nothing was wrong. "Hey, Maya, did you get the pictures I sent Haley's kids won a school award?" I didn't bother with small talk. "Mom, did you apply for a mortgage on the house?" Silence. Then the smallest inhale. Sharp. Quick. "Why do you ask?" she said slowly. "Because the application came through my trust." She scoffed. "Oh, for God's sake. That's a technicality. Everyone does this. Stop acting like you're being robbed. You used my legal entity." Well, she snapped, "Maybe if you weren't so stingy with your help, we wouldn't need to get creative." My jaw locked. "Creative, Mom, that's fraud." "You always exaggerate," she said. "Your sister never makes things this difficult." There it was again. The comparison that had followed me since childhood. I felt the familiar burn in my chest. But it didn't hollow me the way it once did. It crystallized into something cool, heavy, and deliberate. A few days later, I went to pick up Aiden from the Carter house. He'd been invited for family time, which felt suspiciously like Diane attempting damage control. When I arrived, I found him sitting alone on the back porch, drawing in the condensation on the glass door. Inside, I heard Diane and Haley talking. "She's overreacting." Again, Haley said. "Maya makes everything dramatic." Diane sighed. "She's always been like this, sensitive, ungrateful. Honestly, if she wasn't so cold, maybe we'd treat her differently." "You should have canceled more than just a plane ticket." Haley laughed. "She needs reminders." That word, reminders, hit me like a slap. I stood there, hand frozen on the doorknob, pulse racing. That was the moment something in my body finally shifted. Not broken, not bruised, rewired. When I stepped inside, they turned to look at me with identical expressions. Light annoyance, mild inconvenience, zero guilt. "You're early," Diane said. "I'm taking him home," I replied. My voice didn't shake. Aiden ran to me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I kissed the top of his head, then glanced back at Haley. She smirked. "Relax," she said. No one was hurting him, not this time. but I knew what they were capable of, and I was done testing their limits. 2 weeks later came the breaking point. I received a call from the airline confirming my refund for the canceled ticket had been successfully processed, except I hadn't requested a refund. Diane had, and she'd sent the money to her own card. The confirmation email included a timestamp, exactly 1 hour before she texted me, "Have fun walking home." I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at the email while Aiden built Legos on the carpet. The condo was quiet except for the soft clicking of plastic bricks. Something inside me went still, like the eye of a storm settling. Then 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed again, a second message from the airline. A notification that someone, not me, had attempted to access my travel account 3 separate times after the cancellation. Someone trying to cover their tracks. My fingers went cold. I knew who it was. I didn't need proof. I'd been given more than enough over a lifetime. That night, after putting Aiden to bed, I opened the folder on my laptop labeled Options. Inside sat years of financial documents, trust agreements, rent ledgers, signatures, everything my parents had signed without reading, believing the world belonged to them by default. I scrolled through each file slowly, the blue glow from the screen casting shadows across my living room. The lake outside reflected the moonlight, still and glassy. That silence, the one they mistook for weakness, had finally become my armor. A plan formed in my mind, not out of revenge, not out of spite, out of necessity. They had taken from me, lied to me, used me, hurt my son, and then laughed about it. I closed the laptop. My decision wasn't loud. It didn't explode. It clicked, like a lock turning, like a door closing forever, because for the first time I realized I didn't have to wait for them to change. I only had to stop letting them stay. 3 days after the airline confirmed the cancellation, and after I pieced together every lie, every theft, every manipulation, I drove to the Carter house with a steady calm I didn't recognize. The sky was a flat gray, the kind that pressed low over the rooftops and made everything look colder than it was. My tires crunched over the uneven driveway gravel. Haley's SUV sat crooked near the garage, like it had been abandoned mid-tantrum. A broken porch light flickered overhead, buzzing like an insect caught in its own trap. I stepped out of the car, and the winter air stung my cheeks. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the house I used to tiptoe through. The house I once pretended could love me if I tried hard enough. Not today. I walked up the steps without knocking. The doorknob was cold beneath my fingers as I turned it and pushed the door open. Warm air rushed out, carrying the thick scent of lemon cleaner and burnt coffee, the Carter signature. Inside, the TV glowed blue in the dim living room. Diane sat on the couch scrolling her phone. Richard stood in the kitchen making a sandwich, the fridge door open and spilling pale white light across the tile. Haley leaned against the island, filing her nails, boredom written across her face. They all looked up, their expressions almost synchronized. Diane didn't even hide her irritation. "Why are you here?" Richard didn't bother pretending civility. "Shouldn't you be sulking about your little vacation disaster?" Haley smirked. "Yeah, I thought you'd still be crying at the terminal. Guess the charity plane didn't take off without you." Their laughter drifted through the room, light, careless, sharp as glass. I didn't flinch. Instead, I set my bag on the hardwood floor, the soft thud echoing louder than it should have. "I'm not here to explain anything," I said. "I'm here to give you these." I reached into the envelope and pulled out the first paper, placing it gently on the counter. Haley looked down, then frowned. "What is this?" "Your notice," I said. "All of yours." Diane scoffed. "Notice for what eviction?" The room shifted. Even the refrigerator seemed to hesitate. I placed another copy on the fridge, then one on the stair rail. "Yes." Richard stepped forward, snatching the paper off the fridge so hard it crinkled. "You don't own this house." I reached into the envelope again and pulled out the trust deed, the one with the Carter address and the Elmbrook Trust signature. I laid it in front of him. "Yes," I said quietly. "I do." Haley blinked fast confusion, scrambling her features. "Elmbrook. That's a management company." "It is," I said. "Mine." For a moment, no one moved. Then Diane stood abruptly, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous. You can't evict your own family." I tilted my head. "You already did. Twice. Before I turned 20. Haley rolled her eyes. "Stop being dramatic. You don't have the money to own a house." "Maya?" "Interesting theory," I replied. Because the payments, insurance, taxes, and your signatures say otherwise. Diane stepped closer, arms folded. You think you can scare us with paperwork? We raised you. I met her eyes. No. You controlled me. You used me. And you taught me to survive alone. Richard slammed the eviction notice onto the counter. Even if this is real, you don't have grounds. I pressed play on my phone. Their voices filled the kitchen, instantly sharp, unmistakable. Diane, cancel it. Teach her a lesson. Richard. Let her take the bus. She's always dramatic. Haley laughing in the background. The sound bounced off the tile backsplash, filling every inch of the room like smoke. Diane lunged forward, reaching for my phone. Turn that off. I stepped back. No. Haley slapped her file onto the counter. We were joking. That wasn't a joke, I said. It was intent. Richard's face reddened. Where do you expect us to go? You had 60 days' notice. You ignored it. That wasn't real, Haley snapped. It was legally delivered, I said. This is the enforcement notice. The sheriff has already been scheduled. A long, suffocating silence followed. Diane's voice cracked. Maya, be reasonable. Reasonable. The word that had caged me my whole life. I reached into the envelope one last time and pulled out the final document, the mortgage application they'd attempted to push through using Elmbrook's name. Their secret, their desperation, their mistake. I slid it across the counter. Richard's face drained of color. Haley's eyes widened. Diane grabbed the counter for balance. You weren't just late on rent, I said. You tried to use my trust for a second mortgage you couldn't qualify for? Haley's voice broke. We didn't know. No, I interrupted. You didn't care to know. The TV buzzed softly behind us, its cold light flickering across their faces. I picked up my bag. You have 3 days, I said. The sheriff will handle the rest. As I walked toward the door, Diane whispered, What happened to you? I paused at the threshold, my hand on the doorknob. I stopped begging for a seat at a table I paid for. I stepped outside, letting the cold air hit my face. Behind me, the house was silent, not from peace, but from the weight of consequences finally landing exactly where they belonged. 3 days passed, faster than any of us expected. The morning the sheriff arrived, the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, one of those winter mornings where the cold feels personal. I parked a few houses down and watched as his cruiser rolled silently toward the Carter house, tires crunching on the frozen driveway. From a distance, the scene almost looked peaceful, but I knew better. Peace wasn't what lived in that house. Denial did. Diane and Richard stood on the porch with half-packed boxes, their expressions swinging between disbelief and outrage. Haley wasn't there. She'd left the night before, dragging her suitcases down the driveway while arguing with Evan on speakerphone. I heard snippets as she passed me in the dark, words like money lie, and I can't cover for you anymore. Her voice cracked when she said my name, but she kept walking. The sheriff stepped out of his car with a calm professionalism that felt like a final verdict. He approached the porch and explained the process in a steady voice, giving them time, giving them space, more grace than they ever gave me. Diane tried to argue, at first insisting there had been a mistake. Richard demanded delays. But legal documents don't bend for excuses, and this time there was no one left to protect them from themselves. I walked up the walkway, slowly, my boots crunching over old leaves and frost. Diane saw me, and her face softened, not with remorse but panic. Maya, we're still your parents, she whispered, her voice trembling. I stopped several feet away. And I'm still the daughter you never protected. She looked down her breath, ghosting in the air between us. It was the first truthful silence we'd ever shared. When the last box was carried out, I handed the sheriff a sealed envelope and asked him to leave it inside once the house was empty. He nodded. I didn't stay to watch. I didn't need to. Some endings don't require witnesses. Back at my condo, the lake outside shimmered with thin winter light. Aiden curled against me on the couch, warm and safe, unaware of the final shift that had taken place. My phone buzzed a new email from a lawyer I didn't recognize. Diane's name appeared in the subject line. I didn't open it. Not yet. People think eviction is the end of a story, but for my family, it was only the beginning. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe. This story isn't over, not for me, and not for anyone who's had to rebuild their sense of worth from the ground up. I'm going to share what happened next. What my mother tried to file in court, what I uncovered in the bank records, and the part of the story they never expected me to know. Drop your own experience in the comments if you're ready to stop calling cruelty family. Someone out there needs to hear the truth you've been carrying. Would you like me to compile all parts into one full script?